Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of One Vision, the FinTech Fuse. This is Theo, your host for today's episode. Now, we are going to travel back in time, back to the roots of the original season of the podcast. For those of you who have stuck with us for the last 5+ years, you would have remembered, hopefully, that we started with the first season. A little bit about fintech, a little bit about longevity, a little bit about healthcare. And I'm so excited that we can actually bring back someone who embodies all of that. So, hello, thank you for joining us on the show today, Lily. And I need to make sure I pronounce your last name properly, is Lily Vittayarukskul, co-founder and CEO of WaterLily. I love that name for so many reasons. Welcome to the show, Lily.
Thank you, Theodora. Pleasure to be here.
So first off, many congrats on what you have accomplished so far with WaterLily. I love that write-up, and thank you, Marianne, for what you wrote in TechCrunch, which piqued my interest, and hence we are connected now. For our listeners who might not be familiar with your work, I am super curious, would you mind spending some time and telling us a little bit about WaterLily? Why is it called WaterLily? Because, in our culture, it symbolizes a lot of things. And how do you come to doing what you're doing right now? What's your inspiration?
So for those that don't know what WaterLily is, and we are relatively early, is essentially we've built out AI that predicts a family's future aging care needs. And we walk them through logistically on how you build out a care plan and the financial plan so that they're steered more towards a sustainable aging trajectory, whether it's building a plan for your aging parents or it's building a plan for yourself on behalf of your children.
Okay. And if I remember correctly from Marianne's article, you made a switch from what you were originally studying to basically coming up with founding the company.
So just separate from what the company does, you're right. I think what matters is the passion behind it and the story behind it. And so I founded the company because we had to navigate a personal long-term care event in my family. In a past life, I was very interested in aerospace engineering. Won some competitions when I was 12, worked at NASA's JPL or the robotics section of NASA when I was 16, and was just fast tracking myself there. Went to college early as well. Unfortunately, my kind of very aggressive career path took a different trajectory when my aunt, who's a really integral part of our first generation immigrant family, she was diagnosed with terminal stage colon cancer. So she helped to raise me growing up. She was like my second mom. And so when that diagnosis when we became aware of that diagnosis, we went all in on her care. And it was incredibly devastating for us because outside of the chemotherapy, we didn't realize that she would become so incredibly frail that we would have to navigate 2.5 years of her daily long-term care needs as a result of being so frail from her treatment. So things like getting in and out of bed, taking a shower, using the bathroom, dressing, eating, bathing. These are called activities of daily living that we are probably a lot more familiar with our grandparents, where we see that they need help with things, or we may see that already with our aging parents. And so when we navigated 2.5 years, it was really devastating from three parts. The first one is financially. We were just so financially surprised that traditional health insurance just does not cover it. Even if you have Medicare, Medicare is not going to cover a majority of long-term care needs as well. So it ends up being, at least today, a 6-figure surprise. We stepped in physically for majority of that care ourselves, of course, without any plan in place. And as a result, there was a lot of decisions that we had to make in real time. And it was not easy on me or our family members, and there's a lot of strife and conflict there as a result of taking on a high stakes situation and not enough understanding, not enough education. So the hardest part was the fact that there's an entire side of our extended family that we haven't spoken to in over a decade, since this event has happened. And so that was really eye-opening for me, where I realized, some things are more important than, exploring space, which is taking care of one's family. And so I developed a lot of pain and passion for the healthcare industry, and ultimately founded WaterLily on the roots of, I just don't want to see other households experience the same devastation that we did, the same scar tissue that we did. So thesis around it then is, can we reduce that scar tissue or get rid of it altogether for family members that are about to navigate this, by showcasing to young enough family members what that scar tissue could look like using predictive AI. It helps steer them to make better care and financial decisions, or more sustainable ones for their households.
I love this story so much in so many different aspects. One is navigating financial caregiving as something that is so common amongst so many people, not just in the US, but all around the world, right? And so often we lack the tools to help us plan, or we lack easy enough, accessible tools to help us plan. You know, time is always constrained. And so we end up in a situation, like you say, like, oh, wait, we are caught by surprise. And it really shouldn't be. It shouldn't have to be this way. There are other ways. I remember when my grandmother fell, and this was in her early 90s, and all the way until, you know, she passed away. We went through more than 5 years of time where we had a huge family, but we were everywhere. And we're trying to figure out, all right, so what do we do? How do we split the cost? Who's going to be the primary caregiver? And all of those dynamics is incredibly draining, not just from a financial perspective, from a mental perspective. So there are a lot of things that you were saying. It just brings back memories on why the space need a whole lot more work. I wanted to, and come back to this because this is something I feel so strongly and passionate about. But before we go there, so if I understand correctly, the company WaterLily has been, the services have been made publicly available almost a year now. I think by the time the episode airs, it will be just 1 year. Happy anniversary. What are some of the stats that you can share with us? That anything catches you by surprise?
So many things catch you by surprise. I think you always start off with an idea, but then when you execute, it's never what you expect. Is of course, you know what it is. At its core, we just wanted to see more families build out a long-term care plan, and we work with the insurance and financial services industry, specifically with wealth advisors and financial advisors who have a duty, really. It's a part of their fiduciary duty to actually bring up long-term care, build out a long-term care plan. But a lot of them were so avoided the topic or talked about it so high level because there was a lack of tools in this space that helped it become the more meaningful conversation that it now could be through our platform, where it was focused on just national averages, zip code calculators, and long-term care was just nursing home level care, was the way it was talked about it for decades, actually, which is very surprising when you think about it. And of course, as a result, what you have is all these aging households that don't have a financial plan in place, because who wants to make the decision of just almost like a house down payment, really, of an investment based on national averages. And so that's where the space should have taken off, but it didn't take off. And so one is where we were successful is we saw incredible numbers in our pilots with some of the largest like financial enterprise players in the space, many which are under NDA, and where it really helped. We thought that we would help initially advisors who have a long-term care conversation all the time, just have better conversations, be able to motivate clients that they've been trying to motivate for years, being able to have more efficient and effective conversations in like 30 minutes instead of the several weeks that it normally takes to have this conversation. But what we were surprised with is the ones that came to us the quickest were not the long-term care specialists in this space. It was actually the advisors who have never had a long-term care conversation ever. And so even though they were normally terrified about this, I think they understood sort of the opportunity in that responsibility that they had. And they tried to take the opportunity with both hands. And so we saw a lot of uptake from advisors who have never had this conversation, advisors who've only had this conversation once or twice, and the results have been really incredible. Where we thought initially, oh, they'll use our software if, there's high enough NPS, or if they reduce that liability, or if they're a fee-based advisor, they earn sufficient commissions off of any of the right products they're able to sell through our platform. But it was more than that. I would say quantitatively, of all the families that have gone through our platform through the help of a financial advisor, a wealth advisor, 45% went on to purchase some form of a product, whether it's a life insurance product with a rider, or a hybrid LTC policy, or traditional long-term care policy, or short-term care and annuities. All those variety of products, 45% of those clients reported purchasing some form, and that is a 100x increase on the baseline today for long-term care protection sales, meaning that's an 11,000% increase on what actually happens in the market today. So those numbers were astounding for us. We thought, we know that, even doing, if you could get 10% of clients to purchase some form of coverage on this topic, that's incredible numbers, but we were seeing 45%. So that was very eye-opening for us and for the industry, which is, I think, accelerated our growth even more. Over almost a third update their investment strategies on this topic, almost a fifth update their estate planning. And so we kind of touch on that broader, do you have the appropriate power of attorneys in place? We don't direct you to any estate planning kind of source or whatnot, but I think they realize naturally, oh, long-term care is not about being comfortable in retirement. It's actually about protecting my family members. And that's in the form of legal documents as well. And so we've seen these families go on and do that. And the final piece where I was most surprised is because you build out the feature and you have a lot of love for certain features you build out, and there was one around family planning, where essentially, as a part of educating on what your future long-term care event's going to look like, we also predict how your family members would step in by default, because we followed so many households. And so we actually predict how much would the spouse step in by default, or the children or other families, how many hours per week, and how many total hours would they step in, and how they end up subsidizing cost as a result of that. But so many people see that and they say, oh my God, yeah, I don't want my kid taking on care for me. I didn't have to think about it in that way. And they would zero out the hours, or remove the spousal hours. And if you link your spouse or your partner together, we actually line up the predictions. So we could tell you when John says, oh yeah, my wife will take care of me when I grow older, like she's always taking care of me. We actually show them, actually, Jane looks like she's going to need care around the same time. There's no physical way that she could actually take care of you. It becomes a more concrete conversation of like, you can't give her those hours. You have to figure out another way to figure this out. And so almost 2/3 of those clients that report what I did after this plan said they updated how they wanted their family members to step in, and then they had a further or deeper conversation with their family afterwards. So those are in itself like surprising numbers that not only represented that we were making an impact, but two is that what we realized is for advisors, what they cared about wasn't we built the best long-term care conversation, period. It was a matter of you helped me have a really meaningful conversation with my client, and they're only making a decision on all these major pieces because they trust me more now as a result. So the main value that we were adding and quantifying was trust that the advisor was now building with these families. And I think I'll share one last piece, which is anecdotal, and I'm not at all marketing it, but something that was deeply surprising was, one is people were there were an anecdotal handful of folks that came back to me and told me, hey, Lily, guess what? I've lost like dozens of pounds, or I've lost like over 10 pounds or whatever else on our platform. Like, what do you mean? What are you doing? And they said, well, it started with my co-founder, where he was initially an angel investor turned co-founder, where I gave him an initial alpha of the platform. He knew nothing about long-term care. He went on, he saw his predictions, and he was shocked. He's like, wait, why am I going to need care when I'm in my like late 70s? That's way earlier than I expected. Is it because I'm overweight? And so he redid the intake form, and he put in a 15 pounds lighter version of himself. And he saw that it actually extended his lifespan, or at least that healthier version had a longer lifespan, and kind of pulled off that long-term care event. And so it motivated him enough to hire a personal trainer and start to lose that weight. And I think there's also a similar story I could share with one of our wealth advisors where he did it with his father-in-law, and they were never able to convince him to, he's quite overweight. But through the platform, in under 6 months, he actually lost 40 pounds after putting in that lighter version of himself. So we're not at all a digital therapy or anything like that, but that was very surprising as a behavior that some users decided and were motivated to lose weight when all other mechanisms they've tried didn't quite work. So I'll kind of pause.
Wow. That last one is so powerful because if we think back at behavioral health, we think back at, we're always telling people you need to exercise more, you need to eat healthier food because, XYZ. I think the minute you start putting a dollar sign next to it and help them envision a different future self, that in itself is such a powerful message. I remember this was, gosh, maybe at least 8, 9 years ago, where someone was thinking, what if we use technology to create some sort of an avatar of how you would look like as you get older, as a way to instill empathy in people, like thinking about, if I were to put myself in this shoes 30 years, 40 years from now, this is what I need to think. But you take it up another notch, and health and financial services combined together as such a powerful way of getting people not just to think about changing the behavior, but envisioning a different future. You turn up a challenge into opportunity. I mean, gosh, where were you 10 years ago? My goodness, I am so impressed, and this is amazing. You're doing amazing, amazing work. And it's an area that we often talk about, right? It's a very underserved but growing demographics. We're all getting older. There's no way around it. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing as long as we have the tools to help us navigate it. And as you say, thinking about the problem in a different way, thinking about protecting your family members. That is a very important message. So I want to ask you something. The trajectory that you have taken, what you've been able to do with WaterLily, from your perspective, what are some of the things that you think made the company stood out? Because before the show, I've shared, this is an area that I've seen so many founders come and go. It's an area that really need innovation, a different way of thinking, but somehow I hadn't been able to see a company that's been able to stick and be as successful as you are. So what are some of the lessons learned that, if you could share with us? And if you could turn back in time, would you have done anything differently?
So that's a really fantastic question. There's two ways I interpret it. There is the sort of right in our particular silo of the financial services industry, why hasn't some form of like long-term care conversation or innovation around there actually taken off in some shape or form? And of course, the other way I look at this is we're part of the broader aging and caregiving ecosystem, and why are there so many companies that come and go there? And so on the first piece, I'll answer is in the long-term care space, why is it that so many folks are aging? Affordability has always been a problem, but there's never been mass adoption of the long-term care conversation, of more affordable forms of coverage. And the reason why is just because, no one solved the engineering problem, I think, before us, where initially what we had was just basic tools that have existed for many decades, and folks are using the existing kind of like that engineered solution, which is national averages, zip code calculator, and it's nursing home level care. So the advisors would have conversations, and many are still having this conversation where it looks something like, oh, you have a 70% likelihood of needing care. You're a female, I guess. Okay, so long-term care on average for the female is about 3.5 years, and we'll personalize it a little bit. We'll look into what the cost of a nursing home is in your area. And so they might say, well, it's about 10K for like a nearby nursing home. So let's multiply that. So do you roughly have 350K to self-fund, or do you want to look at a policy? That's the conversation. That's what it always was. And there was I think it was more focused on who can we capture through scary stories, really, more of just like, this happened, anecdotal scary stories, like, oh, this happened to my aunt or grandma, so it's going to happen to you, or this happened to your neighbor. This happens all the time, so you should definitely think about this. And of course, I think empathy is something we're still training into our population. It's not an easy one. And so as a result, most folks say, well, that's Joe on the street. You're talking to me about average Joe or average Shane. I'm not the average. I'm not that statistic. So you're now dealing with that psychology that's always been kind of antagonistic to just motivating the spirit of this conversation. And so it was too vague to feel motivating enough. I would say I'll kind of like pause and I would say like that's what was really challenging about the space is it's just the story was not motivating enough, the tools weren't there. And so we solved for the engineering problem. Well, what if you can't teach someone necessarily, empathy in the broadest form, but what if you could introduce empathy in a form of you know enough data and the right user experience? And so that's what we did is we said, well, instead of telling you average Joe or Jane on the street, I'm going to tell you, you like Rebecca, this is we're going to look at all the Rebeccas in our data set of over 500 million data points where we followed families for nearly 30 years. We made sure that we got all the data processing, we got all the biases addressed in our system so that we could speak to you and say like, to the best of our knowledge, without this being a crystal ball, Rebecca, we looked at folks like you and this is what their trajectory looked like. And this is the reactive version of Rebecca. Do you want to change that trajectory in any way? And we always put into that one of the core constraints, which is a financial constraint. Like, do you understand what the cost of this looks like? And as you share your care preferences with us, your financial numbers are also going to change because your care preferences have a dollar amount associated with them. And so I think we spent a lot of time just making sure that we made the most concise, um, motivating, and beautiful experience that we could for that end client who we knew is coming into this conversation knowing absolutely nothing about this topic or having kind of like anecdotal, like hearing anecdotal nightmare stories, like, and how do we design something really beautiful, more matter of fact, so that they can actually make some concrete decision. So that's what we did that was unique in this space is we finally told someone their own story, and we solved for that engineering problem. Now, on the care side, the caregiving and age tech kind of side of the world, you're correct. There's a huge graveyard of startups that don't make it. There's a lot of investors that have their heart into this and they're becoming jaded about does this work or doesn't work. I think at its core, it's a matter of, I guess for those founders there, it's always a matter of who is paying for your service at the end of the day, because many of them tend to target players that actually don't hold the funds and don't hold the money, whether they're targeting the families directly, or they're targeting certain types of care providers. They're not the payer of the system. You have to really go and find who is the dedicated payer in this system and what are the mechanics to unlock that payer's interest in paying for your service.
I feel like you can teach a masterclass on everything you just said. Literally, it's is incredibly smart and thoughtful and human-centered way of thinking about the problem. Looking forward, so you talked a bit about, looking for who will pay for the service. I think that's always been one of the challenges. This is a great idea, but if you can't get the unit economics to work, we can't get it off. So looking forward, since we're still fairly in the new year, what's next for WaterLily?
So just for this year, where one is, I'll share for what's next in terms of like 2025, we're hyper focused on what we're working on. We know that, to your point, we've had our first year anniversary, and I think there's so much more work to be done in this space to improve how well adopted is, this best form of having a long-term care conversation amongst the financial services industry, amongst all the agents and advisors. And so we're really excited with a lot of our quiet partnerships and a lot of our not so quiet, like large investors in this space who want to help out that mass affluent individual, or to help out their policyholders, or to help out, you know, um, their uh, their agents or advisors just not struggle to be effective at their job. And so we're hyper focused on how can we still make the best long-term care conversation and go to market as efficiently and as effectively as possible in the insurance and financial services space. Now, that said, we're getting a ton of interest as well from, one is like from that exact same space, to potentially they expand, what additional family protection topics that we get to serve, because we're doing long-term care, which is the hard what we've been told by others, not by me, is the space has told us, you guys are a little crazy. Why would you focus on long-term care? That is literally the hardest and the most misunderstood aspect of insurance. But if you guys are seeing these numbers in terms of like what you're able to motivate on in terms of like the right coverage and actually moving forward with that, because it's a complex process to try to sell these things, um, you can easily go into other adjacent topics that are probably a whole lot easier to motivate on, just to kind of streamline and integrate the entire experience for that agent or advisor, to better serve this client as well. So there's that. There's a little bit of, expanding what does family protection look like in terms of like, future events, what additional coverage should the family be aware of. And we're also getting a lot of interest on, and actually just, even after you've planned for this topic, we're in the thick of navigating this event now. What do we do? And so we've actually been used by some of the top life insurance carriers in this space. We've already talked about with Prudential how we're running this pilot with them, where we're seeing a lot of really promising data where policyholders really don't understand, the policy that they've taken on. And then outside of that, with care providers, as families start to navigate different care facilities or even trying to age at the home, they still don't understand how to think about this from financial terms. They just think about it in terms of logistically, can I do this? Can I not do this? And what they see is an $8,000 bill or a $10,000 bill, like, maybe my policy could pay for this. Maybe I'm supposed to sell the house. Maybe I don't know. And that's just sort of wasted energy, to be honest, to kind of like spin your wheels and not really know. And so our system is already being, used by the policyholder population, and with some of the largest care facilities as well in the US, is for us just to kind of understand where can we be helpful, where you could actually fill out in our intake form saying, hey, I'm actually building a plan for mom. She already has 2 ADL needs. She needs help, getting in and out of bed and taking a shower. Those are 2 things she needs help with. She's needed this help for like this long. Or like, okay, great. In this intake form, the same intake form, we just dynamically have the right logic there. We just tell them, okay, this is what you told us about what care she already has. Here's what the rest of that trajectory looks like to the best of our knowledge. Here's how much longer she's gonna need help for. Here's when she kind of graduates to kind of that next level of care need. And I'm gonna show you the needs appropriate resources that you'll likely be touching as you try to figure out how do I solve for those needs and the associated cost. So we've been so naturally, I think our software has now been used towards that event, to make sure that the end-to-end sort of aging planning to aging experience is as beautiful as we could possibly make it, at least with our current constraints we have today.
It is such a scary and big problem to tackle, right? And I remember this was one of the design sessions that we did with a firm. We were trying to figure out how can we motivate more people to think about retirement planning, right? How do we get people to save? And one of the feedback that we constantly got was, because we are struggling to figure out how do we plan our day-to-day logistics. I wrote down the word logistics of care, logistics of just basically navigating life. We don't have that mental ability to think about what's going to happen 20 years from now? What's going to happen 30 years from now? I can't even get through this month. How do I think about what do I need, right?
Mm.
And that's that barrier that I think you've been able to break with your solution, and it's immensely powerful. So I can't wait to see what's, if and when, I get to actually meet you in person, what next amazing things that you will bring to the table. Now, before we close, we often ask a fun question. Um, if you were to put three things together in a time capsule that you can open in 30 years, and by the way, 30 years is something my kids gave me because they were doing a time capsule project. What would that be and why?
So I guess I have a quick question for this time capsule. Is there anything special about this time capsule? Like, is anything that you put into it? It's just a normal sort of
Hmm.
box. Essentially,
Yeah,
you kind of dig a hole, you put the box in, and then
exactly.
you
And you
pull it
seal
out
it.
30 years. Okay,
I
because
have
I
one
was
of
about to,
those. My
yeah,
kids gave it to me. They're like, Mommy, just
yeah.
keep this.
I didn't know if it was like a magical box or if I put in an orange, for example, it's gonna look exactly the same 30 years from now. That's what I was curious
Now
about.
that would be cool if you can actually manage to deep
Preserve,
freeze that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a massive market if you could crack that. But so assuming it's just a normal sort of like wooden box, um, I think I would preserve. The thing is, I wouldn't put in any objects in there because my philosophy is just like I'm not a very object oriented like person. Um and I like functional programming anyways, but
I get you. I get you. I was
uh,
engineering by trade, so totally get that.
so I don't think about like holding on to objects. I think objects are gonna come and go in your life pretty
Hmm.
often. So I wouldn't like put anything like that. But um something that you don't always have sort of access to and like things can happen is I would actually put in pictures of
Mm.
people. So I would put in like individuals in there that matter a lot in my life. Specifically three types of pictures. And it's so basic. Um which is I would love to see a snapshot of course, um, me and my fiance and my pup. I think that's like kind of the core household. The second picture I would put in is like a beautiful experience that contained all of my family members and I. And the third one would just be like in this time and place right now, like who are the closest, most precious friendships that I have, and can I capture like a memory? So it's like just those three photos because things are gonna happen in 30 years. You might be have friends, your family members might come and go. Things might happen in our household. It might drastically change, and I think getting that snapshot of who mattered the most at that time, I think would would mean a lot to me. Would help. It's okay if it's a wooden box. It doesn't have to be a special box then.
No, no, no. That's beautiful. We've had someone who told us that they want to have a little jar of sand from a beach, and someone said they want to have a sample of clean air. And want to see, we don't know how the future is going to hold in 30 years. So there's all kinds of different ways you can think about it. And someone said they want to put a book in there because they
Mm.
wonder if there's still going to be a physical book in 30 years. So, but it's always a fun thing to end the conversation with. So before we go, how can we find out more about WaterLily?
It's simple. The name waterlily.com.
Oh,
Uh,
perfect.
you just look that up. It would have everything on one free resources. Like our blog has some of the most kind of respected, credentialed financial advisors who have written incredible, extensive articles across different aspects of this conversation. Whether how do I have this conversation with my aging parents? What is that checklist? Like what is the legal aspects of kind of care planning, things like that. We have an extensive blog that's just free for folks to subscribe to. We're always looking to add to it. And the second thing is you could sign up for our wait list. We actually do take our time to look at all the consumers who are interested and take them off the wait list and see if we could get them access to a service by connecting them with any one of the kind of financial professionals that already use WaterLily and just want to help out. And the third one is just exploring what we do. And if anyone has any ideas about, how we can better serve them in any way, or if you are working with a care provider, you're working with a wealth advisor, like that's where the conversation starts and scales, is with that professional, that trusted mediator, at the end of the day, and them knowing that we exist as an educational tool for families. And so if you could spread our word about what we do, I think that would go a long way. That would be incredible.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Lily, for spending time with us. Keep up the good work. I can't wait to see where you guys go next. And for the rest of our listeners and those who are watching, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of One Vision, the FinTech Fuse. We'll talk to you next week.